Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Today, we want to talk about the new legislation about the protection of rights of freelance workers. And Governor Kathy Hochul signed the legislation that's called Freelance Isn't Free Act, which protects the rights and opportunities for freelancers, workers who experiences not payment for their services. And also, the Department of Labor is going to provide some sort of model contracts that could be used for freelancers and hiring parties to comply with the new law. But I wanted to go to Irene and ask, how would you go about the contract requirement?
Absolutely. So there is definitely a model contract, and it includes some of the requirements of the law, such as the timing for payments, such as the amounts and the payment to be outlined. And again, we've always talked about how you should make sure that the most important are the payment terms, and all of that is outlined. This is just a further protection in New York for freelance employees. And what the law states is that any freelancer that you may hire, and I'll give an example throughout of someone for marketing. So anyone you may hire, let's say for your business, who may earn $800 within any 120-day period. So it's within any 4-month period, essentially, will be subject to this new Freelance Isn't Free Act that the governor has signed into place. And what it requires is that for those freelancers that would be paid more than $800 in a 120-day period or in 4-month period, they do have a contract that outlines the terms of the contract, the payment schedule, if there's any timing, when the work must be completed by, and of course, all the regular contract provisions. You'll have your choice of law, your jurisdiction, and of course, by no means is this an exhaustive list, but you want to make sure that the main responsibilities of each side are always outlined in there. And with that comes the payment terms and dates as well as time of completion, the work that has to be done, scope of work, the parties' information, and so on. Definitely the model contract will at least outline some of the information for those companies that would hire freelance workers more often. It would be very beneficial for the company to have their own contract in place and not just rely on the model contract, because as you can imagine, it's really meant to be one contract that's across the board, is not very industry specific, does not take any company needs into account. And so it's definitely missing and has some holes in it for sure. One of the most important parts as well that I wanted to add in is that the payments are required to be due within 30 days of the time when their build and or work is completed. And that's why it's very important to get down that scope of work, the time of completion, just to make sure that you're in compliance with the 30 days. Something that came up since this law was passed and enacted was a client who had asked, well, how do we know if we're going to reach the threshold with this freelancer? Are we going to reach $800 in 120 days? And the initial project was really on just a website. It didn't really need too much updates to it, just posting a couple of news articles there. And my recommendation, and this will be my recommendation for everybody, is to make sure that you still have everyone sign the contract. You never know, will you hit the $800 within the 120 days or the 4 months or not, having to chase after somebody, or the worst part is when somebody that you've worked with now for a number of months, you send them a contract all of a sudden, there's always that question of why do you now no longer trust me? And you have to point back to this law. But also, nobody wants to track, did they get to the threshold number yet, or are they just $30 short of it? So it's something that's
Right.
best practice, that as soon as you hire anybody for any freelance work, that you have a contract in place. And the last thing that I want to talk about for this topic is that for the purposes of just forms, there's still the freelance workers, as long as, of course, the independent contractor test is completed and done the right way, and you can confirm that in fact the services would not be those that rise to the level of employee, most likely this would be then a status of independent contractor. And so, Jane, what I wanted to ask you was, in these situations for these clients, what are the forms that they would need to properly pay the taxes there and to properly have somebody provide the services of freelance worker?
That's a great question. And it's basically the same forms that we have for independent contractors. So we have to collect the W-9 forms from the independent contractors. And then essentially we have to file the 1099 by the end of January the following year. So right now we're filing the 1099s by the end of January for the previous year. And I'm also really happy to see this legislation in place because we always talk about how, oh, we have these employees and they're protected and they have all this, um, backup. We have the payroll support, but when it comes to independent contractors, it's really just up to making sure that they have their own records. And, yes, the company could have the bookkeeping in place, but there's really nothing protecting them. So I'm really glad to see this legislation in place. And if there's any further questions on this, we'd be happy to help.
Thanks, everyone.